Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 7 p.m. and the date is February 9, 2021. At this time, I will call the meeting to order. The board consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. The alternates taking full part in the discussions and becoming a voting member in the absence of a member or when a member abstains for conflict of interest. Present tonight are members Ms. Lisa Carson, Ms. Kay Towsley, Mr. John Goodekanst, Mr. Joe Kraus, and alternates Mr. Aaron Thomas. And I'm not sure if Mr. Delac is here or not, but he probably will join us shortly. I'm John Golsey, the chair, and we also have the zoning administrator, Mr. David Riggs, online. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator or secretary will state the basis of the objection and any applicable facts or conditions pertaining to the case. The appellant or their representative will give reason why the appeal should be viewed favorably. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of their request will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in general comments will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition will be heard. If necessary, the appellant or their representative will offer concluding summary or rebuttal remarks. Testimony from the floor shall be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. According to Athens City Code Section 230703B, the board has power to grant variances from the strict application of the code, provided the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The spirit of the code is observed, public safety and welfare are secured, and substantial justice is done. According to Athens City Code Section 230710C, variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of the fact, based directly on the particular evidence presented to it, that the standards and conditions imposed in this title, if applicable, have been met by the applicant. And these criteria are exceptional circumstances, practical difficulty and undue hardship, preservation on equal property rights, minimum variance, absence of detriment, and not being of a general nature. And I will go through those when we actually get to the case. And because we have also an interpretation case tonight, I'd like to read that the board also has the power to review decisions of the zoning administrator where an error is alleged. So that's what we're going to be doing in our second case. Any person, resident, or officer, department, or appointed body of the City of Athens aggrieved by a decision of the board may petition the Athens County Court of Common Pleas concerning the illegality of the decision. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the decision of the board to the applicant. We have 2 cases tonight. The first case would be on the property at 9 Atlantic Avenue, and the second case will be the property at 750 East State Street. The board is required to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak concerning any item on the agenda, please state, I do or I do not. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you will present to the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You may open your microphones and state your either yes or no.
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. And because because we can see anyone or we assume that on these online or virtual meetings, anyone who is speaking, aside from the officers of the code office and the members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, they would be under oath. Okay, we assume that everyone who is going to be speak would be under oath. Okay, with that, let's go to case number 1. It's case number 21-01, V for variance. The address is 9 Atlantic Avenue. The zone is B2, and Ms. Heather Hill is the appellant. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 230405A1 to allow a rental on the first floor of the B2 zone, where residential use is only permitted on the second story and above. Requesting a variance from ACC 231001 Table B to allow 0 parking spaces where 3 are required. With that, let's go to our zoning director. Would you like to provide any background or anything?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This application came to us, and it is in a B2 zone where they would require only rental on the above the first floor. This originally was a rental unit up until 2009. After that, this property ended up on the city's blight list, and we were moving forward to condemn the structure, and it was purchased by, I think by the appellant, and they are working to fix it up and repair it. They intend to use it as a rental, and they're asking to have a variance to allow 0 parking spaces and rental on the first floor.
Okay, sir, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Riggs? No? Okay, Ms. Hill, you can now speak. You can maybe unmute yourself and state your name and your address for the records and also your case.
Hello, my name is Heather Hill. My property address that I'm on here about is 9 Atlantic Street, Athens, Ohio.
Where do you live? Actually, we want the address that we can reach you. Are you living at 9 Atlantic Avenue?
My property address is 5975 West Upper Oil Springs Road, Malta, Ohio, 43758.
Thank you. Go ahead. So what do you want this variance for? What is the reason for that?
I would like to have the variance so that we can use it as a rental property, which is what we intended to use it for. It is a condemned property, or not condemned. It was in bad shape, and we have been working every day to fix it up and make it a nice property.
Okay. I got a couple of comments and maybe questions. This area still is zone B2, which kind of to me was a little bit of strange because Richland Avenue, I can understand that to be B2, but this is basically behind the Richland Avenue, 1 block over. And there are probably 8, 9, 10 houses altogether in there. And there is no business, of course. These are all residential or rentals. And I was there today, and it looks like every house does have either a driveway or a garage. And the street is too narrow, so you cannot park in there. So then I was wondering if you could possibly, if you're going to have 3 renters in there, 3 unrelated renters, and the code requires 3 a space for 3 cars, and then would you be able to provide a space somewhere else close by within 250 feet or any other things, because your renters will not be able to park in the street?
The neighbor that's to the right of us, she has said that she would permit us to come through her driveway and to use any unused parking spots. And if you look at the right of the house, there used to be a driveway there that's grown up, and they began to cut down the trees there. It was an old brick driveway, so we're going to re-gravel that or whatever, it needs to have done on it. And she has also given us permission to cut down the trees, because she said that way it'll just give us more room. They go up to the right. If you're standing looking at the front of the house, that goes up to the right of the house.
Okay. If I stand in the front of your house, look on the right, there was like a steps in there. If you remove that, then that gives you the room for one space. See, we're trying to, if you could find 1 or 2 spaces, that will reduces the minimum, it makes it more minimum than what it is now. So are you saying that you should be able to provide 2 spaces?
Either 2 or 3 spaces, depending on how far we take the driveway up.
Okay.
We have been pulling in the front of the house when we go there to work on it. If you've seen the very muddy tire tracks, that's where my husband pulls his truck, in the very front of the yard right there. We would really not like to use that as the driveway, but if we had to, we could. We wanted to put some nice shrubbery and plants to make it look really nice when we get the new siding on it and everything. But what we had thought was to the right where the old driveway was, if we took that up the back far enough into the backyard, then we would have room to put 3 vehicles there.
Okay, that makes a big difference. Any members of the board would like to ask a question?
You said that the whole driveway bricked underneath whatever dirt and junk? Is it all the way up?
I'm not. I don't know how far up it goes.
Okay.
I'm not real sure how far up it already goes, but it goes. I know it goes up past the house. So right now there's at least, where I could see it, where I just messed around looking at it, it goes up past the house. So as what I could see so far, there's room for at least 2. But if we take it up even further, then there would be room for 3, and it may have brick under it over that way as well. So my answer is I'm not certain.
Thank you.
You're
okay.
welcome.
Mr. Riggs, need your help in here. Do we need to reword maybe the motion for the statement of this for variance, that assuming that she is going to provide potentially three spaces, or should we just go with this, because she would have a better chance probably if she can state that she's going to provide and make it a condition?
Yeah, I would recommend that whoever's going to make the motion include, a certain number of minimum parking spaces be included as part of the recommendation.
Okay. I am going back to Ms. Hill again. Would that be okay? Is that something that would be acceptable to you? That we say that you need to provide 3 parking space.
Can we say 2 just in case the brick doesn't go back that far?
Well,
or I mean, we could say 3 if you need me to, and then we could, like I said, we could use the front yard if that's something that we need to do. So whatever you all think. I'm new to all this, so whatever you all think is best, I will gladly do it.
Okay, I see, Joe, you had your head went like this, and then I also saw Mr. Rick did the same thing. So
I would think, John, in just my opinion, she should say she's going to provide the 3, and if there's only room for 2, then she gets some type of written thing from the neighbor where that would be the 3rd space on on that.
Okay.
property.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's because otherwise, we have to have some parking space, especially since the street is so narrow. Okay. Any other questions for either Ms. Hill or the code office from the members?
Yeah. So does that mean this is a 3-bedroom house?
Correct.
It seems so small.
Yeah.
There's
It
a
occurs to
bedroom-
me. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's a bedroom on the 1st floor, and then there's 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor.
Yeah, that street is crazy. I think that if the appellant could commit to creating 2 parking places, maybe 3, and then if that doesn't work out, getting a commitment from the neighbor. The other possibility would be that, what about the architect's office down the street a little bit? They seem to have a lot of parking.
Or the Speedway. Maybe the Speedway seemed to have parking on the side when I was there today.
Oh, they're always busy in there. I don't think they will.
I figured. I just thought I'd make an offer.
I want to be able to have park over there when I go to the Speedway. When from the left side of the Speedway on that, what is it, Milton Street or Avenue, when you go up, and then Atlantic Avenue is perpendicular, so you go right and left, and then you can go straight. I saw a whole bunch of parking space over there, and also on the right side of the street, there was like a bunch of cars were parked. So are those what are those parking spaces for? It seemed to be a lot of parking space.
I used to, my friend lived at 11 Atlantic in college. So right up from there used to be parking in front of that porch. But if you go back behind the Speedway, there was a student housing and they had like parking back there, almost like 6 or 8 spaces behind one of the houses.
Okay.
So once you get on the other side of Atlantic, they had whoever used to rent that had parking, and that parking's still there. So I don't know if people are not back for the semester or what, but yeah, it's not easy to get up and down that road unless people are literally parked in that gravel. It used to be set to the side in front of those houses.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject here, in 2009, when that permit was changed owner, was no longer rented, it was a 3-unit rental.
Okay.
Or a 3-bedroom rental, sorry.
3-bedroom.
Okay.
But when that was a rental, was that before they changed the requirement for parking? Was one of the requirements for the beds?
Yes, at that time it was the property was grandfathered in. They lost their grandfathering in 2010. If they don't renew every year, after 12 months, the grandfather clause that use goes away, and that's what's happened here.
So just to clarify, they were grandfathered to have no parking requirement, or
That's correct. They were grandfathered to have no parking.
have no parking requirement? Okay.
Any other questions?
Are there any other rentals on that block, Aaron? Like your friend that lived at 11. Was it the same layout? Were there bedrooms downstairs as well, or were those all
11 had a bedroom downstairs, living room, and I think like 2 or 3 bedrooms upstairs. But they only had one space where the garage used to be, and then the parking was in the gravel in front of the front porch, which was off the street. But like you see, some places don't have curves or sidewalks, so you see the gravel in front of the home, and that's where the off-street parking was. So that's where most people usually parked at, was in the gravel spaces in the front of the houses on Atlantic.
Okay. Ms. Held, would you like to add anything more? Your last chance.
I think that maybe 11 is the neighbor that I'm referring to. Is that to the right of my house? And she has several rentals in there, Mr. Thomas.
I thought we were talking about 7 next door.
This is a decade ago, so I don't know what the current situation.
Okay.
When I was there today, 11 had that same sort of thing in the front, that white and red sort of, the red X that you have on your porch. I thought 11 had a very similar thing as well, and I thought 11 looked like that was another building that could have been condemned.
Yeah, 11 is another structure that we were working through the condemnation process on.
Yeah. Yeah. So the one here,
11 is to the left of us, I think.
Yes, if you're standing in front of your house and looking at the porch, 11 is to the left.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Mr. Riggs, what's the current status on that property 11 then? Do you know what it is?
Off the top of my head, Mr. Delac, I don't remember what the status of that is.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I think that one. Well, I don't want to say out of turn. I'd have to look it up. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions? Is there anyone who would like to speak on favor of this request, except for Aaron, who knows a lot about the area? Anyone? Is anyone who is would like to speak in the opposition or in general comment? Well, if not, then we are going to.
Anybody, John?
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to close the discussion from the floor, and anyone who would like to make a motion with those changes we talked about the parking, please go ahead.
I would like to move that we grant a variance for 9 Atlantic Avenue, requesting from ACC 23.04.05 A1 to allow a rental on the first floor of a B2 zone where residential use is only permitted on the second story and above, requesting a variance from ACC 23.10.01 Table B to allow 2 parking spaces and 1 letter of allowing parking from the next door neighbor where 3 are required. Is that the right verbiage?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay, Kay, second. Okay, let me go through the findings quickly. Exceptional circumstances. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question or to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties or classes or uses in the same zone. What I could argue is that even though this is a B2 zone, these are all, first of all, residential. I don't think any business is going to be moving in that area, in that neighborhood. I didn't see any. And so it's going to be for living quarters, whether owner or the rentals. So that makes it exceptional circumstances to me. Anybody else?
Well, all the properties were grandfathered and they were always simply rentals.
Right.
They can't really feasibly be used for anything else, it seems to me. So
Right.
it seems reasonable to grant allowing a rental on the first floor on that street.
Okay.
and it was
And-
allowed, and it was allowed for many, many years before, the previous owner just sort of let it go.
Right. Right.
You know.
And that's the same
And-
preservation of equal property rights too. So
Yeah. And of course, that alone will create practical difficulty for the use of this property because, like I said, you can't have the first floor be sitting empty waiting for a business to go in there. So practical difficulty and undue hardship, any questions on that? It will just follows the exceptional circumstances. Preservation of equal property right. So all the neighbors have the same rights or enjoying the same rights that she's asking. Any comment on that? Minimum variance, I think since they have addressed now the parking issue, it would be minimum. You all agree? Absence of detriment. I think they're going to do a wonderful thing in the neighborhood by fixing the police. I think they have been working on it, but it still needs some improvement, I think, and they will be taking care of it. And not of a natural nature. It's not. Are we ready to vote?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Kay.
I vote yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Joe?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes as well. You have the variance. Please contact the code office. And again, we changed the parking space issue. So when you talk to the code office, they will take care of you. Anything else that David, she should know?
No, Ms. Hill, if you just get with the code office, as the chair said, we'll follow up from there and work through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Our second case is case number 21-02I. I stands for interpretation. Property at 750 East State Street. The zone is B3. And Mithril Enterprises LLC is the appellant. The appellant is requesting an interpretation from the board of ACC 230407B3A and the termination of ACC 230407B3A3 on the 200-foot or feet setback condition for drive-throughs or drive-ins that are not part of or otherwise directly associated with an eating or drinking establishment or place. Before we go to the code office or the appellant, I just want to clarify something that we did receive a number of emails from the neighborhood, and they pretty much were opposing a variance or a permit of that nature. And I was kind of surprised because this was not really for a variance. It was just for an interpretation. But it turns out that the appellant or the representative had sent some letters to the neighborhood. And I don't have the copy of the letter, or I don't think I have one. But that had given the neighborhood the impression that this was for a permit, a new permit or variance. We are not going to do any permits, or we are just going to interpret the code as is stated. So depending on how we decide, then there is a couple of options. So we are not going to read those letters tonight, but they will be available. They will be in the files. And we will be happy to make it available to anyone, public or the appellant, maybe tomorrow or so on. So before we go to the appellant, Mr. David Riggs, I just was going to ask a few questions to provide maybe some background for this case. And historically, what kind of interpretation we have done in the past. So if you could please brief us on that, would be great.
Sure. Mr. Chair, thank you. Just as a big overview, this is not, interpretations are not something that we do all the time. So if I could just refresh the board, we've actually done 28 interpretation cases over from 1995 till today. This is actually the first one I'm doing. And that power comes to the board, the interpretation power comes to the board under Title 230703, Powers of the Board, Appellate Jurisdiction. This gives the board three grants them three powers: administrative review, variances, and reversal of orders. This would be the first one, administrative review, and this involves interpretation of cases made by the zoning administrator. This allows the board to do, among other things, where it's alleged that by the appellant that an error has occurred, to hear and decide of a correct determination that was made by the zoning administrator in the enforcement and interpretation of the provisions of the zoning code. This is really technical, but that's what we're doing here tonight. I would recommend that a decision from the Board of Zoning Appeals would be in the form of the interpretation of the provision of the code made by the zoning administrator either was or was not correct. So it's not a yes or no, or it's not a approve or deny. It would be, did the zoning administrator make the correct interpretation of the code? So that's the big picture.
Okay. When the appellant sent you the letter, actually asked you to interpret, and how did it come to the zoning board?
It's not my privilege to do that. That comes again from that Title 230703 powers of the board.
Oh, okay. And did we or you approve the zoning use permit for a general retail use? That's what we did?
Yes, if you look at the code 230407, principal permitted uses, it includes any use permitted and regulated in the B2 or B2D zones. So this will, if you look back in the B2 zones, it looks at the closest thing I could get to it was a convenience store, and convenience stores are permitted in a B2 zone.
Okay.
So we had no choice but to approve that based on the 230407A, principally permitted uses.
And I have a final question before we go to the other board members. When we heard this case before for the variance, maybe it was a few weeks ago, I think we all were under the impression that the establishment was going to be selling food and drinks. And that's what the impression that the neighbors had at the time. Was that the impression that you also had?
Yes, what we did was we looked at the permit, and it wasn't really clear. They said retail sales. Our assumption was we had to make an assumption at that point, and we assumed that they would be selling drinks and maybe snacks and food. And our interpretation from the code officer, my interpretation, was that would be considered an eating and drinking establishment. Right. And to that effect, we went to 230407A subsection B, where it says eating and drinking establishments, drive-in, drive-throughs, and eating and drinking places are not permitted within 200 feet of any R1 or R2 zone. And that's why we denied the original permit.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Riggs?
I have a question. Is there any sort of definitions that guide a convenience store, especially when they sell alcohol or they're distributing alcohol or whatever?
Unfortunately, no. That would have made my job a lot easier. The problem is that we have this eating and drinking establishments, drive-throughs and drive-ins, eating and drinking places, but we don't really define that in the code. That's what made this particular case difficult for the code office for me.
Thank you.
I have a question that's sort of a follow-on to that, which is, given that the code doesn't specifically talk about non-eating and drinking drive-throughs, could we consider 230405A3 as something that the BZA would take a look at if there's a use that's not specifically defined in the code that we would allow or disallow?
Let me look that section up.
Other uses, any other retail business or service establishment or use which determined by the BZA to be of the same general character as the above permitted uses. So if it's a use that's not been specified, does that not give our board the ability to guide non-specified additional uses? Do you know what I mean?
You'd like me to answer that? Yes, you could. Although that was not that was when we did the permit. That was not the section we went through. And so this case is did I select the correct section of the code and apply it correctly?
Right, but I guess I'm just thinking, if we hypothetically thought or decided that you did not, might this be a section of the code that could we could look again at a drive-through that's not an eating or drinking establishment and come to a variance request based on this part of the code, hypothetically?
Okay, I think, we could expand that, but I think our job right now tonight is to interpret ACC 230407B3 with respect to the proposals that I'm going to have to ask exactly what this business is going to be. So maybe we should concentrate on that.
Okay.
But then I suppose we can expand it if you want. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Riggs before we go to the appellant or the representative of the appellant?
Mr. Chair, I had a couple other comments, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead. Yes, please.
One of the things that I did is I went through and before I made this determination, and looked through past case history on similar zoning permit requests. And I have three of them I just bring up to the board to consider. The Kindred Market, this is not a B3, it's a B2 zone, but it's very similar. In case ZN 18-00100, Kindred Market at 284 East State Street had asked for a drive-through where they were clearly going to be selling providing eating and drinking services. The zoning administration denied that permit, and then if you recall, they went to the BZA. The permit was denied because there was a drive-through within 200 feet of a residential zone. And that case was denied at the BZA, I think in 2018. Also in 2007, the McDonald's on Richland Avenue rebuilt their store. So they tore down the store and put it back up. That was in 2007. They requested a permit. And again, they were an eating and drinking establishment with a drive-through that was within 200 feet of a R1 or R2 zone. We denied that case because it was clearly an eating and drinking establishment with a drive-through within 200 feet of a residential zone. They went to the BZA and a substitution variance was approved, I believe in 2007 as well. And the substitution was that the McDonald's had a drive-through before, they tore it down and put it back up, and the board approved a substitution for that use. And then on the other side of the coin, with permit 05-00211, Citizens Bank at 20 East Stimson Avenue had asked for a drive-through with their primary building within 200 feet of a residential zone. And clearly this was not an eating and drinking establishment. So we did not deny that, and a variance was not sought. The permit was approved in 2005. So there's a couple of cases for you on the bookend, the issue that we have here.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very helpful. Mr. Lee, would you like to introduce yourself and your address and then your case?
Yes, my name is Phil Lee.
Could I ask something before he starts?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm sorry. I thought it might save time to at least sort of address the code before the appellant talks about it. And I'm sort of wondering if David Riggs would be interested in seeing the comparison of the B1 A3 eating and drinking places, restaurants, blah, 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 not including drive-in or drive-through restaurants. And if you look then down at the piece of code that we're being asked to consider, I don't think it's very well phrased. but I feel as though it might be pretty clear. Eating and drinking establishments. So that's telling us already that that's what this piece of code is referring to. It's eating and drinking establishments, whether drive-in or drive-through. And if they had only said, instead of saying and eating and drinking places, had said and sit down eating and drinking places, it would seem clear that that code refers to 3 types of restaurant. The drive-in, like the Sonic in Nelsonville, the drive-through, like McDonald's, or the sit-down restaurant. So I guess I would start out by arguing that this part of code does, in fact, refer only to restaurants and not to other drive-through kinds of things, which I think would reasonably be dealt with in a separate place. That's just what I wanted to throw out there at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lee?
Yes, my name is Phil Lee. I'm an attorney in Athens, and I'm representing the applicant in this case, which is Mithril Enterprises, LLC. And my address is 340 West State Street, number 3, Athens, 45701. And we've kind of gone around a little bit discussing what this interpretation is all about. And actually, I think Ms. Towsley summed it up. We have a code provision at issue here, and that is the one that we are seeking an interpretation of from the board. And that is code section 23.04.07A3. And she is correct that the verbiage and structure of this provision isn't well done. As a matter of fact, it was revised by City Council at least twice, and I believe maybe 3 times in an effort to clarify its intent. But each time, I think it got worse. I don't think they ever got quite where they were trying to go, and it still makes it difficult to interpret. And the applicant's argument is that based on the plain language of that section and the context of it, taking into consideration the B1 and B2 zones and the permitted uses in a B3 zone, and the current property that we're talking about is in a B3 zone, that this restriction only applies in instances where we're dealing with an eating and drinking establishment. And I believe that that's the only interpretation we can come to. Now, I don't know if that has always been interpreted that way. And I think what we may have is a situation where historically there may have been some other interpretations of this provision, and those have just become more or less followed and assumed, but I don't believe they are the correct interpretation. If you read that section and take into consideration all the words and the interpretation that would make the most sense. In our particular case, the proposed use, the one that has been permitted, is for a convenience store. And the applicant intends to open a convenience store, but their desire is to include a drive-through. Now, this would be similar to something like Stop and Cop on Richland Avenue, which I consider like a drive-through convenience store. You can not only get cold beverages, but you can buy, prepackaged snacks, convenience items, whatever. The intent is not to sell food for consumption on the premises or drinks for consumption on the premises or prepare food on the premises. That is not what we have been approved for, and that's not the intent of the business. It's a retail convenience store with a drive-through feature. And I think if you read the specific code section and take into consideration that the permitted uses in the B3 zone specifically include, bear with me here 1 second, I just want to make sure I get this right. All of the uses permitted in a B2 business zone, which the language states that any convenience business or general business is a permitted use. And I think that our proposed use, which is a convenience store with a drive-through, falls within that category, since drive-throughs and drive-ins are not defined elsewhere in the code. Now, whether or not at some point City Council may have really intended to regulate drive-ins or drive-throughs that were not part of an eating and drinking establishment, it's hard to say. But from this provision, I do not believe that it applies to this case or to a B3 zone. And I think that pretty well sums it up. But from a practical standpoint, if it did apply to drive-ins or drive-throughs that were not part of any eating and drinking establishment, then it would also apply to banks and pharmacies with drive-throughs. But I think it is obvious that the intent was you first had to be an eating and drinking establishment before it applied. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Well, I do agree with you that, and you brought those examples in the pharmacy and bank. If you want to put a bank in there or a pharmacy and have people to drive through to pick up prescription or make a transaction in the bank, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be discussing it. The question was that initially when we had all the meeting previous time, it was, I think at the time we decided that if you are selling food or drinks, that would be a eating and drinking establishment. Again, eating and drinking establishment, this is what we have to decide tonight. To me, it doesn't mean just a restaurant to sit in. You know, if you're just going through the window and picking food up or drink up, that would be a food establishment. That would be a drinking establishment. And this never came up in the last meeting. But since then, you're now saying that this is going to be a general retailer store. And in somewhere else, you talk about basic convenience store. So please define those for us. What are, if you are having a general retailer store, what would you be selling?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is part of the problem, is none of these terms are defined in the code.
Yeah.
And without specific definitions, you have to fall back on the plain meaning of the words. And in this case, what is permitted is a retail business, I believe is the language in the permit that has been obtained. But the language in the code is slightly different than that, because it states the permitted uses are any convenience business or general business. Now, in our particular case, what we have in mind is, as I stated, something like a Stop and Cop drive-through but the store itself and the products would be more akin to what you would find pretty much like in a Speedway type store. And I don't believe that the plain accepted meaning of an eating and drinking establishment would include a convenience store, where the intent is not for food or drink to be consumed on the premises, whether in the building or outside of the building, whatever. The idea is you drive there, you get your stuff, and you leave. Specifically in, let me get the right provision here because it is slightly different, is, let's see, in a B1 zone, and I believe if my notes are correct, the Kindred Market was in a B1 zone, where our present situation pertains to a B3 general business zone. And a B1 zone is a neighborhood business zone. And in that provision that restricts eating and drinking establishments, it specifically excludes drive-in and drive-through restaurants. So the code is using 3 or 4 different terms at least without providing any definition of those terms, which definitely makes it difficult to interpret the code or apply it. So I understand how the director and the board could easily misapply the code because there is a wide range of interpretation here. But I think when you do take the plain meaning of the words and you look at the different words and the way they're used in the context of the code, that a convenience store with a drive-through is not an eating and drinking establishment. And if it's not an eating and drinking establishment, then the applicable section, which is 230407A3, simply doesn't apply. It would have been a lot better if City Council would have included some definitions in the code. That would have made things a lot easier.
Let's give an example. If I pull into that drive-through, and order, let's say, pizza, and let's assume they have an oven that they make pizza, and then I say I want a large drink, and they pour the drink in the big cup with the ice and give it to me. To me, that is a eating and drinking establishment, even though I'm not going inside to sit. That would be a drinking and eating establishment because you are preparing the pizza, you are pouring the drink in the cup, you're serving for money. That's exactly, I checked the definitions of this stuff in the dictionary, and that would be serving food and drink, and it would be a part of the eating and drinking establishment. So if that you are doing, then the code is very specific. I think the intention of the code, by putting specifically drive-in, drive-through, and eating places in the same sentence, I think their intention was to include that a proposed business like yours might fall under that.
Well, I disagree because our business will not be preparing food. We're not preparing pizza. Fountain drinks, perhaps, but the intent right now, and if it changed, we would have to come back and get approval, but it is to sell prepackaged snacks, drinks in bottles and cans, not preparing food on the premises.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yes,
John?
please.
I think it is unfortunate that there are no definitions, but what I'm envisioning, if I understand what they're describing, is what we would call a convenience store. And they're the stores that are often adjacent to part of a gas station, right? And there are gas stations where you can sit down and eat things there, but there are also others where you simply don't do that. You buy whatever snack or whatever item it is, and you take it to your car and you leave. And so that's why the way I see the code written there is that what they really are referring to is drive-through eating establishments, drive-in eating establishments, and sit-down restaurants, and that they're not specifically including something like a convenience store. That seems to me to be the case. Can I ask another?
No, let me ask you a question before your second one. Then why did they put the words drive-in, drive-through in there?
I think that they meant to say drive in, drive through, and sit down or eat in to cover the three kinds of eating establishments.
So each one by itself would not constitute an eating and drinking establishment?
They would. They specifically, I believe, refer to restaurants. Now, I mean, someone who worked on the code maybe will tell me, well, you're absolutely wrong about that. But that seems to me suggested by it's for one thing, it says eating establishments at the beginning of the sentence. So that suggests that everything that follows is going to have to do with an eating establishment. And then they seem to refer to the three kinds. Drive-in eating establishments barely exist anymore, but probably had quite a few at the time the code was written, like A&W root beer or whatever, where you pull up, you sit there and you eat in your car. So drive-in, drive-through, like McDonald's, and then sit down or eat in, I think refer to three types of eating prepared restaurant food, which is distinct from a convenience store like you might see at a gas station where you get a bag of pretzels and a Coke and you pay and you leave. And there's no question of you eating it in the establishment. Okay,
your second question.
My other question is, I'd like to know more about, I still don't really understand, is the idea that this will entirely be drive-through, that no one will walk in to buy things? There's no place to park and then walk in and...
No, actually, currently we have a permit for the convenience store, which the intent is to open that in the front part of this building. Hopefully you see the site plan that was provided actually at the last minute today. I apologize for that, but there is a site plan. It's a very large, long building. And the idea is to put a convenience store in the front of the building, and there is ample parking for a convenience store. That's one reason it has been approved. But the building is naturally suited for a drive-through in the back because it already has, I believe, 3 overhead garage doors in the structure already. We're going to add one just to improve the flow of traffic. But to further clarify, this is not an answer to your question, but to further clarify, the applicant, I mentioned fountain drinks. The applicant is not going to be serving fountain drinks because apparently that requires a different kind of license or permit through the health department, and they're not going to go that route. So we are talking strictly prepackaged foods and beverages, nothing prepared on site, for consumption. There will be no seating at all. We're not going to provide a table or chairs for people to sit and eat or drink or whatever. It's going to be a walk-in convenience store with a drive-through. And I do not believe that a reading of the statute as written could interpret the restriction to apply to our type of business since I do not believe it meets the definition, which of course is not provided, of an eating and drinking establishment.
Sir, may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How much of your expected business will come from alcohol? That's the big money maker, of course, and you see the big posters around these drive-throughs, and it just looks like a menage of stuff. How much would you said you're going to do drinks, so you are preparing, drinks on premises. So if you want a literal judgment from us, I mean, you'd have to be kind of literal yourself, saying that we would only have bottled drinks. And so I just throwing that out there and just asking that, because some of the people in the neighborhood are 70 feet from you and they have kids, and this is just what we're hearing from.
Sure. Like I said, I attempted to clarify, and I probably muddied the waters more than anything, but we won't be preparing drinks. The only thing we will be doing is selling bottled or canned drinks. That's it. We're not preparing anything. And as far as percentage of business that would be anticipated for alcoholic beverages, I mean, that is hard to say. As you stated, that is the big moneymaker. It's just a fact. I'm not going to deny that. That's where the profit is. And, no business of this type is going to survive, if they're not selling alcoholic beverages. That's just the way it is. And so, roughly 25, 30%, I think would be a reasonable estimation. But again, it's all for off-premises consumption, not on the premises. And when we get to comments made by neighbors, regarding the sale of alcohol, it's inevitable. Anybody who lives near a commercial zone, which some of these people do, have concerns about the consumption of alcohol near their properties. But in this case, we're not talking about consumption of alcohol. We're talking about buying prepackaged alcohol for sale to go elsewhere. We've also made provisions in our plans to specifically direct exiting traffic from the drive-through out of our building to the opposite side of the building from Avon Place, so that exiting traffic must go to East State Street. It would be extremely difficult for them to find a way to get to Avon Place, to drive on Avon Place. They are specifically directed to East State Street to eliminate any traffic impact to Avon Place. And frankly, there are plenty of other businesses, within and, on the same block selling alcohol. It's not something new to East State Street. So we're not going to be contributing to the decline of the neighborhood. We are going to be offering a service that I think will be a great benefit to the neighborhood and a huge convenience once we're there. I think people will see how convenient it is to be able to just pull in and pick up convenience items, either on their way to work, on their way to school, on their way home, whatever. Not have to get out of the car in the rain, not have to park and get out of the car when you've got kids or a dog or whatever. They'll just be able to drive through, get what they need, go home, or drive through on their way, go to work, go to school. I think once it's there, they'll love the convenience, and there literally will be no detriment to the community whatsoever.
Thank you.
Lisa, go ahead.
So it does appear that the concerns of the neighbors have been addressed in the site plan, because they were very upset last time around about, I guess the traffic was to just go through and then continue down Avon Place. And if that's been eliminated, that shows an interest in mitigating those kinds of issue. But if we accept the interpretation of code he's asking us to accept, then it's not our position to talk about whether the neighbors approve or disapprove of what is being sold at this place, because it's simply allowed by code. So I guess like the vape store, a lot of people refer to that, and they don't like having a vape store on their corner, but I don't think they came to us for variance. They simply were allowed to open their store there and to sell those products. And a lot of the neighbors are not happy about it, but it's not in our, it's not in our power to, even though we might be sympathetic to the feelings of the neighbors with children and so on, it's not in our power to say, well, then we won't allow this such and such a business to exist in this spot.
Unless and I don't really want to get into that, but unless the traffic, there are no sidewalks, there'll be traffic, and you can't get around that. But that's for another day, I guess. Or
that might be a safety issue that would again not be our issue, but could be by another agency might address that.
Their new site plan, though, Rob, their new site plan does include a sidewalk and a barrier to keep the cars from driving on the sidewalk too. So they've also made accommodations there, as well as there was a question last time about headlight coming into the house next door, and they were going to put up a wall to stop that. So I think they've addressed all those issues.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure. Sure.
This is really what we're here tonight for. Is really how did I make my refusal determination on the permit? This was permit ZN 20-0002-102, and I think that's in your packets if you have that. I refused that permit, and this is what we're talking about. Did I make the right decision in refusing that permit? But if you look at it. It was a use permit. They give you, I don't know if everybody has that. If you look at it, they call, and they're the ones that filled this out. The present use, or the appellant was the one that filled it out. The present use was for automotive garages and office. And the proposed use, they've called out as a drive-through / food and drink. And that kind of is why I used ACC 230407. Subparagraph 3, because they were calling it a drive-through with food and drink. Later on, they call it a drive-through retail store. But part of the reason I made that determination was based on what they described as their proposed use for this permit, and that's a reason, one of the reasons why we refused that. And the question before the board was that a correct decision or not?
Well, if you already have a permit for so-called general retail store, and that doesn't require any 200 feet distance, and also if, as they are claiming, the general retail store could be food and drinks, then why are we here?
Well, because we refused it because it was a drive-through / food and drink.
Yeah, well, but they have got around that by calling it general retailer store, and that's okay with the code and you and us. So basically a change of the name. So why do we have to go back and argue about what you said?
Yes, because that second permit did not include a drive-through.
Okay. Okay.
It was just for the use.
For the use.
Yeah, if I could add, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we're here this evening is because I agree, or at least I believe, that the drive-through is permitted under the general retail use because drive-in, drive-through is not defined anywhere in the code, as far as I could find. So it is permitted, and the interpretation I come to, and the only one that I think makes sense, is that a drive-through is or falls under the definition in the code of any convenience business or general business, because it's not otherwise defined.
Well,
so that as we intend our business to operate and the products we intend to sell, we are a drive-through retail convenience store, and this restriction does not apply to us. Therefore, the 200-foot setback does not apply. But the reason we're here tonight is to obtain clarification of that interpretation, because there is some question, as to that interpretation. It's not clear. The language is confusing.
And that's exactly my point. My point is that under general retail store, we don't even need to discuss the drive-through or drive-in. That's already, there's no 200 feet.
True.
And you already have the permit.
True.
So why do you want to go back in there and say, what did he decide was wrong or right?
No, that's not why we're here. That would be an appeal, and that's not what we're here for. We're here for an interpretation. We're just asking the board to provide an interpretation of this provision, because it has more than one possible interpretation. And honestly, it's not well written. We just want to make sure we're doing the right thing from a regulatory standpoint. We don't want to make it look like we're ignoring the guidance of the code office or the dictates of the BZA or anything. We want to know that our interpretation is the correct interpretation and that we can proceed with our plans. Otherwise, we would just go ahead and open the drive-through.
So basically, regardless of what we decide tonight, you're going to continue as usual, right? You're going to just, there is nothing that's going to stop you or prevent you from doing anything, whether we say yes or no.
No, that's not necessarily true. If the BZA would determine tonight that they don't agree with this interpretation, that they think that drive-ins and drive-throughs are regulated, even if they're not an eating and drinking establishment or affiliated or associated with an eating and drinking establishment in any way, that they're still regulated under this provision of the code, then we would have no alternative but to go to common pleas court and file an appeal. Although I think that interpretation is correct, because again, as I said, if you're taking drive-ins and drive-throughs separately, which is an undefined term, again, you're back to banks and pharmacies. Those are drive-ins or drive-throughs. I'm sorry, drive-throughs, not drive-ins, drive-throughs. So they would also be subject to this code restriction under that interpretation. And I don't think that makes sense. And I don't think that was the intent of City Council.
So if you did file an appeal, it would be to have the court consider the very same thing that we are considering tonight, the language of the code and how to interpret it?
Perhaps. We would have to evaluate how we would structure such an appeal. But
but that
frankly,
could be one way of doing it.
But frankly, that's a last resort. I don't think it's necessary. I think this is a very simple matter, and I think it just takes a plain reading of the code and common sense interpretation of it. And so we can go through the regular process, continue working with the code office, in all of the other approvals that they have to provide us for an occupancy permit. This is not carte blanche permission to go in and do anything we want. We still have to obtain appropriate approvals. This is just stating that our use is allowed and not subject to this particular restriction. And I think, honestly, it's clear that this is a permitted use, that the restriction does not apply, and that we just need to follow the regular process with the code office, for signage, curb cuts, if we change any exits, things like that. And that's why it's an interpretation. We're just asking for clarification because we don't want to proceed on an assumption or an interpretation that is disagreed with.
So an interpretation of eating or drinking place or establishments is not in the code. There's no.
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Well, it talks about it in that section 3. It does say that eating and drinking. So, and we have to just decide which kind of a eating and drinking this establishment is going to be. Otherwise, for other uses, it's not regulated. I agree. But for this specific application, it does say eating and drinking, including the drive-in, drive-through. Let's go to Joe. I want each one of you maybe express something. Maybe we can all collectively then have a better view. Joe, you have any idea? Any comments?
I could be wrong, John, but I still think this is a drive-through, and I think Section 3 is stating that this was in our right to deny it.
Yeah.
As far as what it says.
Okay, Kay, let's go to Kay.
I guess I agree with Lisa. I think differently that the drive-in and drive-through is specific to eating and drinking places.
Yes,
Yeah,
Rob.
I'm not a voting member tonight, but I'm still going to state my
Yes, absolutely.
comments here, and that I think it's common sense that eating and drinking, and I've looked other places, and it always means preparation or serving of food. And so I think if they had crossed a line, if they were serving fountain drinks, that might be considered serving in an eating and drinking establishment. But in light that that's not even what they're doing, there's no preparation and no real serving going on. I don't see any way that this could be interpreted that way. And I agree with Lisa's assessment of the situation.
Yeah, I think we are clear on the code. We are not clear on the nature of this business. We still don't know what they're selling. Okay, package, what else? General store, general retail store, which is the last one. Can I buy a T-shirt over there? Can I buy shoes over there?
It doesn't matter because that's permitted.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But
that's
not what you're. But you're not selling shoes. You're not selling T-shirt. You're selling food and drinks.
But it's not a restaurant.
Prepackaged.
Would you be selling hot dogs?
No.
Okay.
We are not selling any food prepared on the premises. It is all prepackaged for consumption off of the premises.
You would not put them in the microwave oven to heat it up?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely
but you do
not.
sell fountain drinks, though.
No.
You said you did.
I was mistaken. I said there was a possibility for that, and I got a text from the applicant saying absolutely not, because that required a separate permit from the health department, and they are not pursuing such a permit. So he provided me with clarification that fountain drinks are not included. There's no food prep whatsoever, no food being sold for consumption on the premises. It's like a tiny grocery store. And so I don't think you would consider, a small grocery store to be an eating and drinking establishment.
Okay. And there will be a couple of picnic tables out there.
No, sir.
Okay.
None.
Okay, I guess we have heard. John, you want to say any more? Anything? You okay?
I'm still on the fence. I'm a restaurant guy, and food's food to me.
Yeah.
And either way, it's still food. But I do believe that I don't think that the way it's written that we can stop anything. Like you, John, I agree.
Yeah. Mr. Lee, we're going to probably close the floor for discussion, except I don't see anyone in here from the public who wants to speak. And again, if anybody there is, we want just to be with respect to the code, interpretation of the code, whether you agree or disagree with this establishment, that's a different issue. We are just interpreting the code tonight.
John, we do have somebody who's raised their hand who'd like to speak.
Okay, well, again, with that, condition, then sure. Please introduce yourself and also state your address for the records and your case. Is their microphone muted?
I allowed Richard into the session.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is the first time I've spoken in a Zoom meeting. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Should I turn my video on, or does that not matter?
If you like, we'll be happy to see you, but not necessary.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens.
Oh, we see you now. Okay.
Okay. My name is Richard Zielinski. I live at 24 Avon Place. So I had a couple of things I was wondering about.
Sure.
For Mr. Lee, I guess, or for the rest of you. I've been listening to the whole discussion about food and drink and prepared food and fountain drinks and all of it. So it seems like one thing, okay, if it's going to be a convenience store, I know Mr. Lee has said that it won't include any fountain drinks, any prepared food at all. But all other convenience stores do. So, and let me just read you one just real, just part of a sentence. In the letter that was put on our front door, some of us in the neighborhood received a letter on our front door, and it says, what if you don't want to get the kids out of the car? To run in and grab some coffee or a cold drink. Well, what about coffee then? It's not going to be just, like a can of coffee or anything. It's going to be prepared coffee. And what I would imagine would happen, but I mean, I'm just imagining this. I can't say for sure, but I could imagine that they would say, no, right now, no prepared food at all, no hot dogs, no pizza, no fountain drinks, nothing, none of that. And then they open up and they get the drive-through going, and then they say, oh, maybe now it's time to add these things, because we're a convenience store. All convenience stores have these things. So it seems like it gets a little murkier. Maybe it is food and drink. It seems like. So I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, if I could just respond to Mr. Zielinski.
Sure.
Yeah, it is food and drink. That is clear. What it is not is an eating and drinking establishment. And although there is a reference to coffee in the letter that was sent out, the plans for the business are obviously in flux, and some things we simply cannot do because we're not permitted to do them. They are not part of a permitted use. And so any type of food prep or anything that falls in that category requires a separate health department license, and it is not the owner's intent to prepare any type of food. And so anything that requires preparation or that license from the health department is not going to happen here. If the applicant intended to start doing so, serving like fresh brewed coffee, something that's not prepackaged, or fountain drinks, for instance, anything like that. If it was determined that we needed to do that or wanted to do that, that would then be a change of use, because then we could potentially fall within the definition of an eating and drinking establishment. It is my position that it still would not be an eating and drinking establishment. However, that question is still out there. And it would require a health department license, and we would have to come back and get approval from Mr. Riggs and the Code Enforcement Office to make that change, because that would be a change of use, and we couldn't do it. I mean, we can't represent here that we're not going to do something and then do it if it's a change of use requiring another permit. We would have to come back for approval.
Let me verify that statement, because Mr. Riggs, is there anywhere in any of the records in the past or present that says that these guys are not going to, serve coffee or prepared food? You just approved it for a convenience store. And as Mr. Zaleski said, that's what they do. They prepare food in those stores. So the appellant would be free to do whatever they want to. Am I correct or wrong?
It would be my opinion, if they were to submit, and this is where we're coming from in the code office, if they were to submit another permit for the convenience store with the drive-through, that we would deny that based on the same section, ACC 2304-07A3. So it is permitted, but not in the way we understand the code, but not permitted with a drive-through, unless you guys tell me different.
Is there anything in the records that already says that if they want to serve coffee, they have to have a permit?
There's nothing in the records.
But so they could be serving coffee, and what is going to stop it?
Correct. And
wouldn't that be a change of use from convenience store to eating establishment?
The convenience store allows selling coffee, as Mr. Zaleski just said. If you go to a convenience store, you can get hot dog, you can get coffee, you can walk out.
Some yes, some no. It seems that what we're saying here is that this particular convenience store is not an eating establishment, and therefore, the code only refers, if you agree with me, the code is only referring to eating establishments there. If you don't agree, then you can just say, no, any kind of drive-through. But as the appellant's lawyer points out, there are a lot of other drive-throughs and they're not regulated. So that does sort of suggest that what the code is talking about is restaurants.
Well, I want to go back to Mr. Lee again. You stated that if you decided to serve coffee or fountain drinks, you need to go get a permit. Why do you have to get a permit? Wouldn't that permit that you have now would cover that?
I believe that approval of a convenience store would permit that. However, we have clearly stated on the record that we would not be selling coffee or preparing any food or drink on the premises. That is on the record.
So what, how would you enforce that?
We don't enforce it.
Yeah, I know.
The code enforcement office would.
Can you enforce that, Mr. Ricks? Can you go in there? You said you stated publicly that you will not sell coffee, but now you're selling coffee, so we're going to stop that. Can you do that?
I suppose we could. That's not something we've traditionally done. We've provided the use permit, and then we don't typically go back and check periodically to make sure that the applicant is continuing to use their address the way they had described in the permit.
Yeah.
I suppose we would if we got a complaint from a resident. We'd definitely go and check it and see.
Well,
but we wouldn't typically go and check those just randomly.
I apologize getting in the side, but that's not what our job is tonight. So let's just focus on the topic.
If I could add, one possibility would be that the board could adopt the proposed interpretation of the code in this particular instance with the proviso that that section does not apply because this is not an eating and drinking establishment, because it specifically is not selling any food or drink prepared on the premises, including fountain drinks or coffee. That could be part of the interpretation. And in that case, it would work more or less almost like a conditional use permit. Although this is not a conditional use situation, it would have the same effect. Meaning your interpretation is premised upon our business not being an eating and drinking establishment, and your determination that it is not an eating and drinking establishment is based upon our representation that we will not be serving any foods prepared on the premises or for consumption on the premises. And that would, I think, pretty much address all the concerns. It would be very limited in scope, not a broad interpretation. It would limit what the applicant could do from a business perspective and provide enforceability if it were necessary.
That's very interesting. And so under those circumstances, if we accept this free legal advice, then if the owners did wish to start selling coffee and hot dogs, we could point to that, and they would have to come back and get variances or whatever kinds of agreements for them, the 200 feet or whatever.
And in my opinion, yes, because your interpretation was strictly limited to the facts of this case, that based on our representations, we would not be selling food or drink prepared on the premises. That would be enforceable. And I may send you a bill, so it may not be free legal advice. No, but
I have somebody else that'd like to speak if you want to let them in.
Yes, please.
All right, I'm promoting Greg to the panelist.
Okay. Please state your name and your address, and only with regard to what we are discussing. Greg?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Greg Lavelle. I live at 16 Avon Place, and I see this whole thing way off track. That I see this issue as a drive-through where you're taking your car into a physical building and exiting that physical building with goods. We don't care if they're T-shirts, food or drink, non-prepared there. you're driving through the building to obtain these goods, and this is what the code specifically states is not allowed in the zone that it's in based on the distance from the residential area. And that's the only thing that you need to consider, I think. It's not a matter of, is it in an eating establishment? It's a matter of they want to drive through and they were rejected the first time. They're taking semantics into a second section of the code and trying to say that it is allowed as a drive through. And I don't believe that it is. And that's my feeling about the situation.
What is the definition of a drive-through, drive-in? Do we have that?
You don't. A drive-through is literally through. McDonald's is not a drive-through. You drive up to the window, pay the money, get your goods, and leave. You don't drive through the physical building of McDonald's. You do drive through the physical building of this convenience store. I don't mind them having a convenience store. It's the drive through that building. And good luck on ever getting out on State Street through their parking lot on the other side of the building. You're never going to get out on State Street. But that's not the issue either. The issue is what was voted on the first time that they asked for a variance, and it was denied, and it should be denied again this evening.
Well, Greg, let me get back to the screen that I need. You see, you have been away from zoning board for too long. Here is what it is. If this was a pharmacy or a bank and they wanted to go through to get money or to buy prescription drug, it would have been okay.
How? I don't understand.
Because it doesn't say anything about any other businesses.
Well, I'm confused by your reasoning. I don't understand how any other drive-through would be okay if you're saying that.
Well, it says because part 3 says specifically with eating and drinking establishment. If this was not a drinking establishment, I don't think we need to even discuss this.
And it's not. It is not an eating and drinking establishment.
That's what we have to decide. Yeah, that's what we are deciding.
Right. And
yeah,
from a plain meaning of the language, I don't see how.
Well, you again, last time it was food and drinks, and now is general retail. You're saying it's not, and we have to decide, if this was actually a, for the drinking and, for your nature of business. I think, if it is eating and drinking, then you have to be within 200 feet, and that's what we're discussing. But again, if it was any other business, that is not regulated by the code. Only eating and drinking places.
Okay, I agree with that.
Okay, so Greg, did that answer your question?
Well, I didn't have a question. I was just making a statement of fact.
Okay.
About the current code, and we've heard this way too many times of people coming into town, buying a piece of real estate, having an idea and a dream without really investigating deep into the city codes. And then once they obtain that building, they put the horse before the cart. We've seen it too many times.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree and object to the opinion testimony as to the applicability of the code, because that's a legal question. And opinion testimony is not admissible on the record.
Well, this is true, so that we should let the courts decide this, which we've done before in the strip club situation.
Well, yeah, in this case, I think it's kind of silly to rely on the court to determine what an eating and drinking establishment is.
Well, it's been so highly discussed this evening that if you're unsatisfied with the code about drive-throughs in your establishment, then the court needs to decide for you and us. The city code officer cannot decide this, so he's throwing it in the lap of the zoning board. So the zoning board, I think, should just table this, and you can take it and appeal it or deny it, and then let the court decide. We've done that before as well, and good luck.
Can I ask Greg a question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So, Greg, do you not find it problematic that that particular section of code starts out by saying eating and drinking establishments?
No, because we're the bottom line is the drive-through issue.
But
I don't care if they have a convenience store or whatever they sell there. I don't care. And the code doesn't care either. It's a matter of in that particular piece of property, you cannot have a drive into the building and exit the building that close to a residential area. Simple as that. That's what you're dealing with.
I don't think the code is clear about that.
Well, then let the court decide or send it back to city council to clarify the code.
Yeah, I would love to have city council clarify many things. Yeah.
So table the issue.
Can I respond? I think that if you take that interpretation that Greg is presenting, then the previous use of the building, driving in to get service, auto service, is also then not allowed if you take his interpretation. Which
no, it doesn't. That's not my interpretation.
Well, the drive-through was there ever since.
There was no drive-through auto repair. It was a garage. You didn't drive your car in, sit in your car, and have your oil changed and drive out. It wasn't a Jiffy Lube.
I think that's been discussed in the code for that kind of a business, for service stations and those things. So those are addressed already. Okay, Greg, thanks for your input. Yeah, good to hear from you. Okay, any last words? Any other comments before we close the discussion from the floor?
Yeah, I have a question.
I do have one more person who's waiting to talk.
Okay, since we are allowing, let's do one more.
Have Nancy coming into the meeting.
Okay, please unmute yourself, state your name and your address and your statement. I see that you're unmuted, Nancy, so you need to unmute yourself. You're
yes, this you heard part of it then. I'm Nancy Walker at 13 Avon Place.
Okay.
I wondered if we could have some explanation of what the issue is about the variance, what it is that the business plan requires that they have less than 200 feet.
We are not discussing really the variance tonight. We are deciding tonight whether this is going to be an eating and drinking.
I've been very attentive, but I want to know that answer. I want to know what that is.
Actually,
what's going to change about the plan to have a drive-through carryout?
Oh, okay. Let me maybe I understand. Maybe ask Mr. Riggs. If we say no, I'm sorry. If we say yes, if he approved, if he decide we agree with the appellant, then what happens to that variance that they had? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, and what does that? How does that impact what the store is going to be?
Yeah.
Sure. So there's several ways to do this. The first one would be if you decide that my interpretation was incorrect and that my assumption that this is not an eating and drinking establishment was incorrect. The appellant, if he wanted to drive in or drive through in for this site, would have to reapply to the code office, and we would go through that process. I think that was the question. Nancy, was that the question?
I think so. Okay. But since we already have denied that variance, don't they have to wait for a year at least?
No, I can't find anything in the code that says that would wait for a year. So what would happen is that variance would go away and they would need to reapply, I believe, through the code office.
The way I understood, unless it's changed recently, unless there is substantial changes, they probably have to wait for a year. Maybe that was.
Well, my question is, how will it change the business plan? Is it going to make it a different entity if you don't have the variance?
If I may,
Yes.
Yes.
if I understand the question correctly, since we're looking for an interpretation of a specific code provision here, if the board adopts our interpretation, which is basically that the business as proposed is not an eating and drinking establishment, which is what we're asking. If the board adopts that interpretation, then the requirement for a variance goes away. No variance is required, because if we're not an eating and drinking establishment, the 200-foot setback requirement does not apply to our business. We don't need a variance. We just need approval for the use. So the variance is a non-issue in that case. I think that was the question, but I'm not 100% sure. I hope I helped instead of confused things. Yeah, and if I may, so that we just don't completely lose sight of the fact that while we're discussing semantics here and code language very specifically, the other thing to keep in mind is we're talking about a building that, but for this business, would be empty, and a huge building right on East State Street that would remain empty. I don't know of a lot of businesses clamoring to open in that size and age of a structure in the middle of a pandemic, whereas my client is trying to open a new business in an empty building and provide jobs.
We do understand that, but again, our function tonight is totally different, so we're just going to stick with that.
I just wanted to put that under consideration.
Yeah, fully. Again, we're not really considering anything with respect to this property. We're just interpreting the code.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Correct.
John, we do have somebody else that's raised their hand. Are we letting second round of questions come in, or I just want to let you know that there's somebody raised their hand?
I like to ask my board members see what they decide.
I would like to hear from some other people. I also want to just make a point. Okay, so we're tasked with making an interpretation using vague eating and drinking establishment definitions, drive-through, drive-in definitions. Who comes up with those originally? City Council?
Yes.
The definitions for those. So we have a very dull knife here, and we're asked to cut a piece of big steak. And I think that's where we're at right now, and it's tough. But I think we should hear from other people what their interpretation of it is.
Or, like Greg suggested, there is a possibility that we could also vote to get some clearance from somebody.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, whether that was a feasible thing.
Sure.
Either to ask council. I mean, we don't want to go to court because that costs money. But is it feasible to have council consider it? I don't know.
Well, if I may, I believe City Council will be, just based on my own discussions, will be addressing this provision in the future. But the entire process of amending a code provision will take months. This is not something City Council is designed to address promptly the way the BZA is. We're looking at a property owner's development rights here and a determination of those specific rights. And if we rely on City Council, it's going to be months down the road before they revise the city code to address this language provision, which is an issue.
Lisa,
and hopefully they will at some point.
Yeah. Lisa, we are tasked, actually this is our job, this is our duty to decide independently to decide how we interpret the code. It doesn't matter whether we incorporate right or wrong. There is no right or wrong in here, but based on our understanding as of now, by reading the code, we're going to interpret individually, each one of us, by our vote. And this is our job. And I don't think we can get counsel on that. We could get some information because, again, the nature of this business right now, as of this point, to me, especially after being emphasized that this is a food and drink, to me is a eating establishment. To some other one of you is different. So I think first maybe I was thinking about maybe tabling it, but again, it's our job. It's our job to interpret this as we see it.
Yeah, I just wanted to consider the possibility of what Greg was suggesting. But Kroger sells food and drink, but it's not a restaurant.
That portion of it is eating and drinking establishment.
Well, you buy food, but you don't eat it there.
Yeah.
So.
You do. Don't they have a sitting area for the coffee place? That's
a separate thing. But
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
John, I have Richard back into the meeting.
Richard. Oh, hi, Richard. Yes, go ahead.
Would it be okay if I just make a real quick combination question and comment, I guess? Let me see. It seems like, I think Mr. Lee said, I think it's been said that they already have a permit to be a convenience store, right?
Right.
So what I'm wondering, if it were like a normal average convenience store, if it was a Speedway kind of convenience store, but it didn't sell gasoline, but it's if it were a normal average convenience store that sold coffee, fountain drinks, maybe hot dogs, maybe little bit of pizza or something, would that kind of a convenience store be subject to the 200 feet?
Go ahead.
I'm asking that because I still think, I mean, not that I'm not trustful of people, but I still think it makes a lot of sense to say right now, we won't sell coffee, we won't sell fountain drinks, we won't do any of these things. But then after you get the drive-through and everything's all going after a while, then you start to sell all those things. You become a more regular, normal convenience store that sells those things. It seems like.
Well, my impression from what I've heard from Mr. Lee is that the customer will never see the inside of this place. They just come in. It's not like they're walking inside to make their own coffee or their own hot dog. They just come into the window, they order something. They don't really see the inside of this whole place, right? Am I correct?
No, I'll just clarify a little bit, because there is a front portion of the store that will be a walk-in, and for lack of a better term, I'm using the word convenience store because it's the type of items we will be selling. However, the convenience stores that sell the food items that Mr. Zielinski was speaking of, like the pizza, coffee, fountain drinks, things like that, they have to have a health department license. They are regulated by the health department. That's not what we're going to be, because we don't want to be subjected to regulation by the health department and have to get that license. By selling only prepackaged goods, we're a retail store, basically. Whether you call it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Any sort of food you have is tasked by the health department.
Right. It's a different kind of license, though. It's there's a license that is required, or a permit. I don't know which it's called.
And inspections, yes.
For the other type of, because of preparing food, yep, which is something we're not going to go through.
Why not?
They have inspections for convenience stores too.
Because we don't want to be that type of business because we want to be a drive-through.
If you want to be in 6 months, there's nothing that is, you just go get the license.
I've already addressed that because I've stated that if the board wants to put that language in their interpretation, they have the authority to do so. They could say that this is not an eating and drinking establishment as long as it does not involve the preparation of food or drink on the premises. It's that easy. You do it all the time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we have heard all from everyone, from the appellants, from the board members, and also from the public. So unless there's any other immediate question, I know Joe is getting a little bit kind of tired.
I'm sitting on a stool. I'm sitting on a stool. My back is sore. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Okay. For then, maybe we should close the discussions from the floor. And however you guys want, go ahead and make a motion. If you're making a motion, please be very precise and careful that what yes means, what no means. So we want to make sure that we don't get confused on the yes or no. So I would say,
I don't feel very capable of doing that, but we do want to include the language about defining this as not an eating establishment, and that if that were to change, right, then there could be code enforcement if, a neighbor were to complain or whatever.
I don't think I want to add anything because this is the code. Either Mr. Riggs was right or wrong. But once you start adding something to it, then you're changing the nature of it. So unless
you're not amending the code, you would be adding language to
discussions are closed. Yeah, no, discussions are closed from the floor. So we are just discussing among ourselves right now. So again, our job is very simple. You read the code, exactly what it is, and Mr. Riggs interpreted one way, and based on what we know, we have to say whether he was right or wrong, and that's all we have to do.
Well, I'm going to file an objection on the record because I do not believe that is the question before the board, and I do not believe that the decision of the board must be limited to that degree.
I am just reading whatever it says in here. In my appellant is requesting an interpretation from the board of ACC 230407B3A and a determination of ACC 230407B-3A3 on the 200-foot setback condition for drive-through or drive-ins that are not part of or otherwise directly associated with an eating or drinking establishment or place.
That is accurate.
John, I'll go along with you, but I do think that the alternative of including that other language, I agree that it would not be amending the code, but it would possibly address the concerns that many have raised about whether they're just trying to get this interpretation and then, start making hot dogs and cotton candy, and I don't know, but that's fine. We'll do what you say.
Well, if that was the case, Mr. Riggs would have decided maybe differently. I don't know. So again, I'm just trying to get the consensus in here, and we could vote on it, or if you want to make a motion on what you just said, you want to propose, we can vote on it.
Too hard. I guess if we were to agree, that is to say, agree with the appellant and say that Mr. Riggs made the wrong decision, then any of this could still happen. If they did start, preparing food and sitting people down, then a neighbor could complain, right? And then enforcement would be initiated, I think.
I think because it's on the record, so on the records they have stated that. Mr. Lee has stated on the record that this will not be a place to prepare food or have a coffee or a fountain drink of that sort of information. But how are we going to enforce it? I don't know. Okay.
I'm not prepared to. I'm stumbling with this eating and drinking establishments. Okay, having segmented this throughout the city and what is and what isn't, just because of you've got a little cellophane package with food. The health department does inspect those places, so they really do. So that means that they are an eating and drinking establishment, even though you're not doing it on there. The drive-through thing is also concerning for me.
John, our interpretation is to kind of think what the people, the framers, whoever they came up with the code, what did they mean? What did they specify? Just the eating and drinking and not other things. So, I think I'm comfortable to put myself in their shoes and kind of see what they meant. And this has been, Mr. Riggs, you mentioned historically that they have gone back and forth in the wording of this, right?
Yeah, well, if you'd permit me, I could talk just a little bit about that, or I know it's getting late.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I did some research and I went back to see this code has been written at least 2 other times from its current version. The version directly before this was revised in 2009. So that we're talking about 230407B3, General Business Zone. What it said before its current case was that eating and drinking establishments, the principal building shall be at least 200 feet from any R1 or R2 zone. So they didn't talk about drive-ins or drive-throughs at all. They just said no eating and drinking establishments within 200 feet of any R1 or R2 zone. And that was effective up until 2009, and then the code was changed to what it reads today. If you go back one more iteration, back in probably in the 1990s, 230407B3 said eating and drinking establishments were permitted. However, drive-in eating and drinking places, summer gardens, and roadhouses were also allowed, provided the principal building was at least 200 feet from any R1 or R2 district. And what they've kind of, in my opinion, what they've kind of done is tried to blend those two together, and it didn't work very well. So that's the history, some of the, so just a quick history so you can kind of understand where City Council may have been coming from.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helped or hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Very good. John, did it help you? Okay, let's draft a motion. Lisa, you're looking at me. Go ahead.
I'm not sure how to do this.
Well, you may want to say, I move to determine if the interpretation of the code office, based on ACC 23 and both of them, you can read both of them, on the 200 feet setback was correct or wrong. And if you say yes, that means he was correct. Okay. If you say no, that means Mr. Riggs or the code office was wrong.
Okay, so I don't reference the property or anything.
No, we don't need to.
So I move that we provide an interpretation of Athens City Code 230407B3A and a determination of ACC 230407B3A3 on the 200-foot setback condition for drive-throughs or drive-ins that are not part of or otherwise directly associated with an eating or drinking establishment or place, with a yes vote to mean that we think that the code office was wrong,
Interpretation was wrong.
The interpretation was wrong or faulty, and with the no vote would be in support of the interpretation provided by the code office.
Very good. Very good. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Well, I saw Kay's hand first, so
okay.
Let's go with Kay. So we don't need to do any findings. We don't need to do any other discussions. We're going to vote. And again, if you say yes, that means Mr. Riggs or the code office was correct.
No.
Nope.
No.
That's
the opposite. If we say yes, we're agreeing with the appellant that the interpretation was wrong, I think.
I think you read it the other way, but...
that's the way I believe she stated it.
Yeah,
okay.
He's right.
Okay, so we are going with the appellant. If we say yes, that means we agree. We do not agree with Mr. Riggs' interpretation. But if we say yes, that means Mr. Riggs was wrong. Correct? Okay. Any questions? We don't want to, because I remember once we did the same kind of a deal and we were confused half the way and then we had to go back again. Okay. So yes means Mr. Riggs or the code office was wrong in their interpretation. No means he was right. Okay, let's start with John.
No, I believe the code office was right.
Okay.
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Joe?
No, the code office was correct.
And I will also vote no. The code office was correct. So 3 to 2, the interpretation of the code was correct. Okay, that's our decisions. We have disposition of the minutes from the January 12, 2021 meeting. I read it. I guess everything was fine. And I mentioned it to Carrie. Have you guys have read, or would you like to make a motion to approve
Yes, I
it?
move to accept the minutes from our last meeting as written.
Okay. Second? Go ahead, Lisa. Second it.
I was going to let Joe second, but I second.
Okay. See, Joe, you're always late.
I am late.
So, all in favor of approving the motion for approving the minutes of January 12th, say yes or do one of these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone no? Okay. Motion approved. And now we have, this is the month of February. So what we do, we have re-elect or not re-elect, but select a chair for the 2021. I was going to ask Carrie if he received or she received any nominations, or you can self-nominate if you're interested in serving in chair for another year, for 1 year, or you can nominate someone.
I nominate that guy, John Golsey.
I'll second.
He's got that cool thing in the back that already says Athens DZA.
Yeah. That was intentional for this reason only. Okay, folks, you all want me to serve for another year? Say yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any opposed?
If you don't mind, John, we love for you to serve.
Well, I have really enjoyed this and I have learned a lot, and
Good.
I am happy to serve for 1 more year.
Good.
But it's so much fun, as much fun we had tonight. I think one of you should also have the fun as well.
You did a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Really.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully we can get together again back in the City Hall sometimes, maybe in June or when the summer comes, so we can visit each other.
For sure.
Good night.